Before we proceed with the briefing, initiate your support protocols. Give this transmission a mark of approval, secure your subscription oath, and engage the hype function. Then, report in the comments below. State your chapter of origin, or the one you hold in highest esteem. Your answer will be recorded for the Watch Commander. Thank you, brother. The vigil continues.
It was said that in the Deathwatch, every day is a good day to die. I never liked that saying, mostly because it's true. Space Marines aren't supposed to fear death, but only a fool believes he's invincible. In the Deathwatch, we confront nightmares regularly, and more often than not, death is the only certainty. Dawn hadn't even broken, and I already found myself bracing for death inside the rattling confines of a drop pod. We were three black-armored giants hurtling through a dead planet's atmosphere, and the noise in that pod was like the Emperor's own fury trying to rip us apart. The first time I'd ridden a drop pod years ago, I remember gripping the restraints so hard my armor's fiber bundles creaked. Now it was almost routine, yet my two hearts still thudded with battle thrill. If I were a superstitious man, I might have thought this roaring descent was a bad omen. But I'm not superstitious. I'm a space marine of the Deathwatch. Omens are for the weak. We make our own fate, one bolt at a time. Wham! The drop pod slammed through turbulence, shuddering violently. Restraint harnesses bit into my power armor. Across from me, Brother Gabriel calmly made the sign of the Aquila over his chest, his eyes closed as if in prayer. Typical Dark Angel, stoic even when plunging headlong into hell. I caught a snippet of his murmur. It sounded like the litany of protection. For all their dour secrecy, the Dark Angels are as pious as any, clinging to prayer in the face of the abyss. Next to him, Brother Garan's augmented arm whirred as it gripped the harness. The Iron Hand's face was hidden behind his custom skull-faced helmet. I imagined his expression was as impassive as the metal visage he wore. He probably had absolute faith in the drop pod's machine spirit to deliver us safely. Iron Hands trust metal more than flesh. I wouldn't be surprised if he was calmly monitoring our descent velocity and angle through his bionic eye, even as the rest of us were shaken like dice in the Emperor's cup. As for me, Brother Ivar of the Space Wolves acting kill team leader, I just grinned. A feral, lopsided grin that no one could see through my helmet's muzzle. This was the fun part. In the few seconds of relative calm between atmospheric buffets, I glanced at the mission chrono ticking in my visor display. We'd be groundside in less than a minute. Good. The sooner the better, before the tomb's denizens woke fully. In the red gloom of the drop pod's interior, lit by pulsing warning runes, I caught Gabriel's eye. I could sense rather than see his disapproval of my relaxed posture. Dark Angels always think battles should be met with stiff formality and solemnity. I flashed him a cheery thumbs up. He merely inclined his head in that annoyingly serene way, probably wondering for the 100th time why a headstrong space wolf was put in charge of this mission. A space wolf leading a Dark Angel. There's an old joke in there somewhere. Sometimes I wondered that myself. I'd volunteered for kill team leader when no one else did, reckless or bold, take your pick, and the watch captain had given me the honor or the burden. Maybe it was my prior experience fighting Necrons on Ioria that tipped the decision, or maybe they just drew lots and I drew the short one. Either way, I wear the mantle. Gabriel and Garan had accepted my command after some initial hesitation. Months of training drills and minor missions together had forged solid trust between us. They'd seen I can lead, and I'd seen they'll follow. That will have to be enough. Our orders were straightforward on parchment and infinitely more complicated in execution. Investigate and neutralize a Necron threat on the planet Somneft, a tomb world. Intelligence said an ancient Necron dynasty's outpost lay beneath Somneft's rad-blasted deserts, recently disturbed by seismic activity, or perhaps some unlucky excavation team. Reports were sparse. An Adeptus Mechanicus survey outpost had gone silent, and some long-range Auspex scans picked up energy signatures below the surface. Nothing good, in other words. The Imperium, busy fighting on a dozen fronts in the Nephilim sector, had no armies to spare for one dusty backwater world. Only the Deathwatch of Watch Fortress Prescience recognized the danger. If those Necrons fully awoke, they could become a threat to entire systems, maybe even flank the Indomitus Crusade's supply lines. So here we were, one kill team against a potential Necron uprising. Par for the course. Watch Captain Voss had briefed us personally before launch, fixing each of us in turn with his lone, augmetic eye. "Your primary objective," he said in a gravelly voice that brooked no nonsense, "is to assess the extent of Necron activity and eliminate their leadership or neutralize their awakening process. If possible, retrieve any artifacts or data for further study. Failing that, ensure nothing leaves that tomb. Exterminatus is out of the question. Too many Imperial assets already invested on Somneft. Discretion, brothers. The Inquisition is watching." Gabriel had stood a little straighter at that last part. The Dark Angels have a complicated history with the Inquisition, to put it mildly, and being under an inquisitorial microscope never sits well with them. Garen merely nodded and quietly checked the calibration of his weapons. Ever efficient, that one. And I, of course, couldn't help but make a wisecrack about how discretion isn't a typical Space Wolf trait. But I promised I'd try to rein in my exuberance. Voss was not amused by my humor. He rarely was. He gave me that withering stare that said he'd be filing a report if I stepped one toe out of line. Proper gentleman, our watch captain. The drop pod jolted again, harder this time, pulling me back to the present moment. Exterior temperature readings spiked as we tore through the last layers of the upper atmosphere, plasma sheathing our hull. Soon we'd be on final approach. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat and muttered a Fenrisian battle prayer under my breath, more out of habit than necessity. A low growl of words in my native tongue, asking the storm to lend me its wrath. It was an old hunter's prayer taught by my long-dead pack leader. "Spirits of the gale and storm, guide my hand and steady my heart. Let my axe bite true and my aim strike firm." A plea for strength to slay the beasts ahead. Not exactly a sanctioned imperial litany, but the All-Father, the Emperor by another name, has many faces across the stars, and I've never been picky about how I honor him. Gabriel would probably bristle if he knew. To his ears, anything not from the Ecclesiarchy's approved hymnals borders on heresy. Thankfully, the roar of our drop pod drowned out private devotions. "Incoming fire," Garen reported over the squad vox, calm, as if commenting on the weather. A cascade of green-tinted threat icons flickered on my HUD. Our pod's Auspex picked up multiple energy discharges, lancing up toward us from the ground. Surface to air fire. Looked like someone down there was very much awake after all. "Evasive thrusters firing," intoned the drop pod's machine spirit in a monotone binaric cant over our interlink. I felt a gut-churning sideways lurch as the pod's limited thrusters fired to jink our trajectory. Drop pods aren't exactly nimble fighters, they're basically armored coffins shot out of orbit on a prayer. But the machine spirit did what it could. A thunderous impact suddenly rang against the hull, a deafening clang that reverberated through our bones. The whole drop pod spun violently. My vision blurred as G-forces tried to hurl my inside sideways. Harnesses cut into my chest plate, keeping me anchored by the grace of the machine. "Emperor's teeth," I swore, feeling the blood rush to my head. That was a close one, 1 degree more to port, and that Gauss blast might have cored straight through us. Gauss, flak, Gabriel said evenly, opening his eyes now as if we were merely discussing the weather. I marveled at how he could identify the ordnance mid-freefall without a hint of panic. Through the whine of overstressed plating, I caught a sizzling hiss, residual energy crackling along the hull. Necron anti-aircraft fire had grazed us, likely a burst from a Gauss emplacement trying to strip our pod apart molecule by molecule. Fortunately, drop pods are thick-skinned, layered in ceramite and adamantium. Even Gauss beams take a moment to chew through that. We hadn't been hit dead on, just a glancing blow. The hull held. This time, the altimeter rune in my HUD spiraled down 1,000 meters, 500, 100. A new roar grew beneath the howling wind outside as the pod's retro thrusters fired full burn. We were all pressed hard into our seats, the inertial dampeners straining. With one final thunderous crash, we hit ground. The force of the landing jolted even our transhuman frames. The explosive bolts fired, and the drop pod's hatches blew open with a bang. Daylight, or what passed for it on this overcast wasteland, flooding in. Instantly, fine dust and radiation-laced air swirled into the compartment. My helmet filters clicked as they adjusted. Somneft's atmosphere was technically breathable for humans, but saturated with desert particulate, gamma spores, and a faint chemical taint of ancient fallout. My visor's rad counter ticked steadily in the yellow, nothing our power armors, shielding, and biofilters couldn't handle for a while. But unprotected humans would get sick out here in days, if not hours. For us, in power armor, no issue. I was already out of my restraints as the ramps slammed down into the dirt. Bolter in hand, I leapt out onto the surface of Somneft. My boots thudded into grayish sand, kicking up little clouds that glowed faintly green in places. Radioactive traces. The drop pod had carved a shallow crater. Overhead, the sky was a sickly yellow-gray, the sun a weak smear behind layers of dusty clouds. The horizon was flat and desolate, broken only by distant jagged rock formations and the twisted silhouettes of some abandoned structures, likely the Adeptus Mechanicus outpost we were meant to find. Gabriel and Garen emerged right behind me, black shadows against the smoking hull of the pod. We fanned out in textbook fashion, covering arcs. If anything had greeted our arrival, it wasn't immediately apparent. Just the moaning wind carrying the tang of ozone and something burnt. My auto-senses scanned for movement, heat, life signs, nothing large. A few skittering biosignatures around rocks could be small vermin. No imminent hostiles that I could detect. I sniffed the air through my helmet's intake. Even with filters, I caught a scent, metallic, ancient, like a tomb opened after millennia. It reminded me of the charnel stench of a Necron crypt we raided on Ioria years ago. A mix of dust, machine oil, and long-dried corpses. Smelled like trouble. "Area secure," Gabriel voxed, his voice soft but focused. He knelt briefly, running a gauntleted finger through the irradiated dust. His armor, painted matte black like ours, bore a green-robed figure on one shoulder pad, the icon of the Dark Angels chapter. That robed figure's helmet had the face of an angel, but Gabriel's own face was all business as he surveyed the wasteland. "I have eyes on the outpost," he added, indicating the structures I'd seen. 2 kilometers to the northeast. No visible activity. I attempted a directed Vox hail on the Mechanicus channel. Outpost Epsilon 13, respond. Nothing but static in return. Auspex shows minimal power readings, he reported after a moment, analyzing the Auspex feed. "Copy that," I said. "We head there first." That station's our only lead. If the Mechanicus poked the hornet's nest, we should see what they stirred up. Moving, rumbled Brother Garan. He had already retrieved a chunky Auspex device from his belt with his servo arm and was sweeping it methodically. Radiation within acceptable levels. No biological hazards detected. Traces of neutron radiation consistent with Necron energy weapons on the surface here, relatively recent. He pointed with his bolter at a shallow crater not far from where we landed. The edges of the rock were glassy, as if flash melted. A Gauss impact, a few days old at most. I shared a glance with Gabriel, so the Necrons were indeed active enough to shoot something, likely the outpost or its personnel. The silence of our Vox link to that station was starting to feel ominous. "Eyes up," I ordered, though it was hardly necessary. We Space Marines are always vigilant, especially on alien soil. Still, I felt compelled to say it, a habit from my days leading young blood claws back on Fenris. Some habits survive even the transition to Deathwatch. We advanced in a wedge formation, myself at point, Gabriel a few paces to my right and slightly back, covering our flank with his stalker pattern bolter. Garin to my left, his heavy plasma gun humming faintly as its coils energized. Step by step, 3 black-armored figures crossing a dead world. The landscape was bleak. Every footstep sank an inch into fine dust and gritty sand. The only sounds were the low thud of our ceramite boots and the keening of the hot wind. The outpost grew clearer as we neared. Prefab hab containers clustered around a Vox pylon, half buried in sand drifts. One structure looked partially collapsed, like something had blown out its side. During that short trek, I mused at how fate had woven our 3 threads together on this forsaken world. A son of Fenris, a son of Caliban, and a son of Medusa. Space Wolf, Dark Angel, Iron Hand. In another life, we might have been rivals or never met at all. Yet here and now, in the crucible of war, we were kin of a sort. We each carried our chapter's legacy into battle. Gabriel with his unwavering discipline and zealous faith, traits hammered into him by the secretive halls of the rock. Garin with his cold logic and iron resolve, the embodiment of the machine god's creed that flesh is weak and only duty is eternal. And me, a child of winter and saga, fighting with the ferocity and instinct my wolf lord instilled in me. Different worlds, different creeds, but united in purpose. I recalled the early days of our kill team's formation, when distrust flickered between us. On our first training engagement, Gabriel had taken offense at my casual jests and what he termed undue levity in sacred duties. I responded by challenging him to an honor duel in the sparring cages, a Fenrisian tradition he was surprised I offered, but one he accepted. We fought with practice blades for nearly an hour. He dislocated my shoulder and I bloodied his lip before we collapsed from exertion. After that, something changed. He granted me a measure of respect, and I to him, and the iciness thawed. As for Garin, he was content to let us stupid meat brothers beat each other senseless while he studied tactical data. But when he saw how we set aside our differences, I sensed even Garin warmed to our developing camaraderie, inasmuch as an iron hand ever warms to anything. Now, in the present, as the mouth of the Necron tomb loomed ahead, I felt a fierce pride in my kill team. We were 3 warriors from vastly different backgrounds, but we would face the coming darkness together. The Emperor had willed it so. There was no room for old rivalries or doubts, only the bond forged in the blood of our foes. I tightened my grip on my bolter and steeled myself for what lay below. As we closed in, I raised a fist to halt. Gabriel instantly dropped to a knee, scanning the perimeter through his scope. Garin's servo arm clanked softly as he adjusted his stance. Through my visor's magnifier, I saw debris scattered around the outpost, twisted metal struts, a snapped cog mechanicum emblem that once marked the station's entrance, and what might have been a corpse-dragging trail in the sand. No movement, no heat signatures. We approached the main hab structure cautiously. The heavy plasteel door was ajar. Actually, it was bent and hanging off one hinge, blown outward from within by considerable force. A faint burnt odor wafted out. I signaled Gabriel and Garon forward with hand gestures. We stacked up at the breach. I peeked in quickly, bolter ready, then signaled all clear. I sidled through the gaping doorway, sweeping the interior with my muzzle. Gabriel was close behind, covering the opposite angle, and Garon lumbered in last, his servo arm scraping the doorframe slightly. Inside, our helmet lights cut through swirling dust motes. The compartment was cramped for anyone in power armor, but navigable single file. It looked like a storm had blown through. Emergency lumens sputtered from the ceiling, casting erratic shadows over a scene of carnage. Cogitator banks along the walls were shattered and scorched, sparking occasionally. The metal floor was littered with overturned stools, broken tools, and hundreds of spent shell casings. Dark stains splashed across consoles and bulkheads, blood, oil, maybe even incinerated vitae. The tang of charred flesh and ozone hung heavy in the recycled air. A low thrumming hum came from deeper inside, maybe a failing generator on its last legs. I moved forward into the wreckage, bolter raised. The interior temperature was high. I could see heat shimmers in my visor. As I stepped past a toppled workbench, my foot nudged something soft. I glanced down, an arm, severed cleanly at the bicep and mostly mechanical. The crimson Mechanicus robe it had been attached to was still clutched in its augmetic fingers. A head, slumped against the far wall, was a motionless figure. A tech priest by the tattered red robes and the multiple bionic limbs jutting from the body, or what remained of one. I moved to the body, kneeling. Even through my armor's rebreather, the coppery tang of blood and the stinging scent of burned metal hit me hard. The tech priest's metal parts were riddled with Gauss scoring, small holes and gouges where flesh and alloy alike had been flayed at the molecular level. His organic components were long dead. What little flesh remained looked mummified and brittle from energy discharge. His augmentic eyes were dark and cracked. One of his remaining mechadendrites still twitched slightly, as if some last electrical impulse was fading. The man died in pain, that much was certain. Emperor's mercy, Gabriel muttered behind me. He had found another corpse, half buried under debris, this one torn nearly in half at the waist. For a dark angel to invoke the Emperor's mercy for a Mechanicus tech priest was a sign of how gruesome the scene was. Gabriel's gloved hand gently closed the terrified staring eyes of the fallen adept. A hot surge of anger flared in my chest. For me, the carnage stoked a cold wrath. I felt my canines bare in a silent snarl as I regarded the butchered remains. The Xenos would pay for this. Poor bastards. If they're lucky, I thought grimly, the Omnissiah has a nice scrap bin set aside for them. Gallows humor, maybe, but it's how I cope with sights like these. Gabriel shot me a sidelong glance. He's long since learned to endure my irreverence. He murmured a quiet prayer under his breath, perhaps commending their souls to the Emperor. Garon was already at a damaged cogitator station, plugging in a data spike from his wrist. Attempting to retrieve logs, he announced, jacking in. Sparks flew from the console, but the iron hand coaxed its machine spirit diligently. After a few tense moments, he spoke again. Partial data fragments found. Extracting audio logs. After a moment, Garen's optical lenses brightened. Multiple log files found. Playing the most recent intact entry, he droned. A burst of static crackled, then a reedy, emotionless voice with the telltale modulation of a Mechanicus augment spoke. Explorator's log, Theta 23. Date, 928 M41. Local time, 2307. Magos Dural Kivon reporting. After 6 weeks of excavation, my suspicions are confirmed. This site holds remnants of Necron design. Earlier today, Servo Probe 11 breached what appears to be an antechamber beneath the subsurface strata. Radiation levels spiked momentarily. We recovered a curious artifact, a black metal cube inscribed with luminous symbols. It thrums with intermittent energy pulses at 34-second intervals. The Xenotech's purpose is not immediately clear, but I hypothesize it may be a data storage or control device. It has been relocated to the outpost lab for study. Enginseer Row 986 will run a full spectrum analysis overnight. I have reported our find to Explorator Command. If my theory is correct, this could be a Necron trove of unprecedented value. Tomorrow we plan to widen the breach and access the lower chambers. We traded looks as the recording ended. A Necron artifact in their lab, likely the cube Garen had found on the Cryptek. The fools had brought an active Xenos device into their midst. My gut churned. Garen's finger raised for silence as he accessed the next file. "Playing final log entry," he said. The Vox speaker spit more static, resolving into a panicked voice full of distortion. "Specimen secured. Initial scans. Unprecedented energy readings. The Necron device. It's waking up. We need to..." There was a loud bang. Shouts. "No! Seal the chamber. Code Magenta. Xenos Conta." The recording dissolved into a cacophony of screams and the shriek of tearing metal. Then it cut off abruptly. We all exchanged grim looks as silence fell again. So the Mechanicus unearthed something they shouldn't have, and it woke up and slaughtered them. They fought back, Gabriel noted quietly, towing a fallen las rifle whose barrel was melted and bent. The walls and ceiling were pockmarked with las burns and bullet holes. Ordinary humans, even Tech Guard, stood little chance against Necron warriors, but it looked like they tried anyway. "Poor sods," I muttered. "Curiosity killed the cogboy, I guess." Garen disconnected from the cogitator with a snap. "Coordinates for the breach are in the log data. The tomb entrance is roughly 0.5 kilometers from here, beneath a ridge." "That lines up with the structures I saw outside," Gabriel confirmed. His voice was tight. Like me, he was simmering with restrained fury at the massacre we were now walking into. "The difference was," he whispered a benediction, and I cracked my neck and growled an old Fenrisian curse. I rose from the blood-sticky floor and checked my Bolter's magazine, swapping it out for a fresh one loaded with Kraken-pattern penetrator rounds. These were hardened and with extra propellant, good for punching through Necron alloy. "Pack your weepers, lads. We're going to a funeral," I said darkly. Gabriel actually let out a soft snort of amusement at my black humor. A rare sound. "Your funerary humor remains appalling, Brother Ivar," he said, shaking his head. "I do my best," I replied, and racked the new magazine in with a satisfying click-clack. "Let's move. Emperor only knows what's had time to wake up down there." Outside the outpost, the wind had picked up, blowing dust devils around our feet as we found the path toward the coordinates. It led toward a yawning opening in the earth about half a kilometer behind the outpost, nestled at the base of a rocky ridge. As we approached, we saw it wasn't a natural cave. Its edges were too smooth, shaped into a metallic archway inscribed with alien glyphs. 2 statues flanked this arch, half buried in sand. They were humanoid but stylized, angular figures holding strange staves. Necron sentinels frozen in eternal guard. One's head was missing, blown off by some tremendous force. The other was intact, its eyeless metal face regarding us impassively. A shiver crawled up my spine as I looked up at it, though inert stone or metal, I could almost imagine it suddenly lunging. Nothing happened, of course. The entrance itself was dark, a ramp leading down into shadows. Faint green light emanated from deeper within, a sure sign of active Necron technology. A cold breeze wafted out of the open arch, carrying a dry electrical odor. I drew my combat knife with my left hand, holding it in a reverse grip while my bolter was up in my right. Some tight corridors might be ahead, and a blade, especially one wreathed in a disruption field, can be faster than a gun in close quarters. Gabriel switched to his bolter at the ready, and Garen's servo arm hovered over his shoulder, ready like a scorpion's sting, while he kept his plasma gun aimed forward. "Formation. I'll take point," I said over the Vox. As the one with the keenest senses, space wolves are gifted that way, it was logical for me to lead. Also, if anything needed a more, shall we say, personal touch, I had a chainsword magnet locked to my pack, waiting to rev up some carnage. Gabriel fell in behind me, covering high, and Garen took the rear, watching our six and scanning for any tech anomalies. My heart thumped a little faster. I had read enough reports to know that beyond this door could be an entire Necron host slumbering in darkness. One wrong move might see us facing a horde far beyond our capacity to handle. But that was what we came for. This moment, this gamble. "Form up," I whispered over Vox. "Whatever comes, we meet it together." We stepped across the threshold of the Necron tomb. Immediately, the temperature dropped a few degrees, and the sounds of the outside world fell away, as if we had plunged underwater. Our helmet auto-senses amplified the dim interior. The walls of the passage were seamless black metal, etched with glimmering green circuitry patterns that pulsed gently like veins in the dark. The air was stale, almost clinically sterile, with undertones of ozone and ancient dust. I raised a fist to pause after a dozen paces. "Vox check. Short range only beyond this point." Somneft's crust and the interference of Necron structures would likely cut off long-range comms. We had prepared for that. Once inside, we were on our own, out of contact with any orbiting support. Not that we had much support, just an automated retrieval signal if we could manage to resurface and call for extraction. "Understood," Gabriel acknowledged softly. Garen clicked an affirmative in binary. We proceeded down the gently sloping corridor, our footsteps unnaturally loud against the metal floor. Each footfall's echo reminded us how alone we were down here. My twin hearts beat steadily, adrenaline keeping me alert. These tombs could stay quiet until the moment you were surrounded by skeletal Necron warriors springing from alcoves. I'd seen it before. Our suit lights cast probing beams ahead, cutting through the darkness. Occasionally, the walls themselves emitted that faint ghostly glow, enough to outline shapes. I saw more glyphs etched in the metal, possibly telling the glories of whichever Necron lord was interred here. Save it for the historians, if any of us lived to tell them. Several minutes in, the corridor opened out into a wider chamber. I raised a fist to halt at the threshold. It was an antechamber of sorts, about 20 meters across, with a high ceiling supported by ornate columns. At the center of the room gaped a large circular pit, or well, ringed by Necron script and softly glowing panels. On the far side, another passage continued deeper into the complex, sealed by a heavy-looking door with interlocking metal plates. We scanned the room thoroughly before entering. My visor picked up shapes strewn around the central pit. Bones? No. Metal fragments. Shattered pieces of what looked like Necron constructs. Scarabs, the little insect-like drones they use. I could see at least half a dozen shattered scarab husks littering the floor. They'd been destroyed, but not by us. Gabriel noticed too. "Perhaps the Mechanicus team did this," he voxed privately. I doubted a few tech priests with small arms could take out that many scarabs, unless they caught them inactive or used mining charges. Then again, something else could have destroyed these scarabs, possibly something Necron. An internal security measure? The thought was unsettling. We moved in carefully, boots thumping on the metal tiles. The pit in the center drew my attention. I approached its edge, keeping my bolter trained downward. It descended deep, a vertical shaft disappearing into darkness, and far below I saw faint green lights. Could be an access tunnel or a power core chamber. Garen took a knee by one of the scarab remains, poking at it with a blade attachment on his gauntlet. "Cleanly sliced," he reported, indicating a near-perfect cut through the machine's carapace. High-energy blade, perhaps another construct's tool, not Las or Gauss. We traded puzzled looks, Necron on Necron violence, or automated defenses cutting down errant scarabs. Hard to say. Gabriel circled the periphery of the chamber, covering the unopened door on the far side. This door likely leads to the main tomb complex. "Right, the cogitator coordinates point down that way," I said, jerking my head toward the sealed door. It loomed about 4 meters tall, inscribed like everything else, with no obvious handle or mechanism. "No visible controls," Gabriel noted, running a gauntlet along the door's edge. "Likely needs a trigger to open, either remote or perhaps it reacts to presence. Let's see if we can encourage it." "Hushed," I said. I stepped in front of the door, raising my left hand in a mock gesture of greeting, truly just waving half sarcastically at the sensors. Knock, knock. To my surprise, something answered. A deep grinding noise reverberated through the chamber. I stepped back instinctively as the door's plates began to shift with a scrape of metal on stone. "Good work, Ivar," Gabriel said dryly from behind me as the door started to iris open. "Your manners are impeccable." I chuckled under my breath, nerves jangling under the humor. I hadn't expected that to actually work. The door was indeed opening of its own accord, not because of my flippant wave, but likely triggered by our presence or some pre-programmed timer. Cold green light spilled out from the corridor beyond as the two halves of the door slid apart. It was brighter than the antechamber, meaning something very active lay ahead. My grip tightened on my bolter. Whatever comes, we meet it together. "Form up," I whispered over the vox. "Whatever comes, we meet it together." We advanced past the now yawning gateway and into the emerald-lit halls of the Necron underworld. The corridor beyond was wider and taller, with intricate columns lining the walls and strange flowing script running along the floor edges. The green illumination here came from strips of crystalline material embedded in the ceiling, casting everything in a ghastly glow. We hadn't gone more than 50 paces when the tomb decided to play its first trick on us. One moment we were moving in formation down a seemingly straightforward passage. The next, my auto-senses blared a warning, some kind of spatial distortion reading beneath our feet. "Hold up," I started, but before I could finish, the very floor beneath Brother Garan shimmered. With a flash of sickly green light and a noise like grinding steel, a circular section of the floor simply ceased to exist. No, it opened. A hidden trapdoor or portal had snapped open right under the Iron Hand's feet. Garan had no time to cry out. With a crash of metal on metal, his heavy form dropped through the floor and out of sight, the round portal irising shut behind him as instantly as it had appeared. I froze, processing what had just happened. 1 second, Garan was there, the next he was gone, swallowed by the tomb itself. "Garan!" I yelled, rushing to where he'd stood. The floor had sealed seamlessly. Only a faint circular outline remained, and even that was fading as the metal reknit itself. It was as if the hallway had never had a hole at all. Gabriel was already by my side, running a gauntlet along the now solid floor. "He fell," the Dark Angel hissed, frustration edging his voice. "No, he was taken," I growled, fury bubbling up at my own oversight. "The Xenos bitch controlling this place took him." I slammed my fist against the wall in anger. Immediately, I regretted it. With a grating rumble, the section of wall I struck rotated in place, almost sending me off balance. I jumped back. Emperor's blood. Everything here was rigged. "Stay alert," Gabriel warned needlessly as we both raised our weapons, expecting perhaps more surprises. None came immediately. The corridor around us was quiet and inert again, as if mocking us. Garen was gone, likely dropped to a level beneath or teleported Emperor knows where within the complex. I toggled my vox. "Brother Garen, report. Garen, do you read?" Static, then a burst of noise and a faint voice. "Here, lower, intact, host it." The transmission dissolved into a whine of interference. "He's alive," I said, relief mingling with anxiety. "Somewhere below. Vox is patchy, but he's fighting." Gabriel's jaw tightened behind his helmet's grill. "We must assume hostiles between us and him. The Necrons will not leave a lone intruder unmolested for long." He was right. We had to reach Garen quickly or risk losing him. I cursed myself for not detecting the trap, so much for the famed Space Wolf senses. "Coordinate on his last signal," I said, forcing my voice to remain level. My suit cogitator triangulated as best it could, marking an approximate location for Garen, down and to the east, maybe 100 or 200 meters away horizontally. The geometry of these tombs could be deceptive, though. "There might be a maintenance shaft or alternate route," Gabriel suggested, his tone brisk, but I could hear concern underlying it. The corridor we were in presumably continued forward, but if Garen was below, perhaps there was a stairway or vertical access somewhere branching off. I scanned the walls, flipping through visual spectra. Those Necron glyphs might indicate junctions or lifts, if only we could read them. No obvious side passages here. We'd have to find a downward route elsewhere. "Forward," I said decisively. "This hall must lead somewhere. With luck, an access down, or at least a way around." We double-timed it, more cautiously than before, but with urgency lending speed to our steps. As we advanced, the architecture began to subtly change. The corridor widened and turned, opening into a broader hall lined with columns. The green lighting grew stronger, emitted by larger crystal nodes spaced at intervals. It illuminated scenes engraved on the walls, bas-reliefs depicting stylized Necron figures and what looked like human silhouettes being cowed or destroyed. Typical Necron hubris carved in stone. What caught my attention, however, was a faint sound echoing up the hall. Distant clanging, like metal on metal, and a buzzing hum. Weapon fire? I exchanged a glance with Gabriel. That could be Garen, making war down below. We quickened our pace, throwing caution aside for speed. Garen was tough, but alone even a space marine wouldn't last forever against continuous Necron assault. The hall sloped downward, curving gently. As we jogged along it, something flickered in the corner of my vision. A distortion among the columns to our left. I halted, throwing out an arm to bar Gabriel. "Movement," I voxed tersely. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a ripple like heat haze against the black metal surfaces. My enhanced vision picked out a shape, a long, sinuous form clinging to one of the pillars, blending in with active camouflage. It was as long as a Fenrisian wolf, but serpent-like, with multiple jointed limbs, and it was crawling toward us along the ceiling, utterly silent. "Wraith!" I snapped, swinging my bolter up. I loosed a burst of Kraken rounds. Bolt shells sparked off the pillar as the thing darted aside with uncanny speed, phasing through the solid stone as if it were a ghost. A Canoptek Wraith, guardian construct that can shift its matter to pass through obstacles. At my shout, a second shimmer appeared, no, two more, skittering along the walls on the right side of the hall. Gabriel reacted with the reflexes of a seasoned Astartes. He pivoted and squeezed off a shot from his stalker pattern bolter. The hypersonic round blew a fist-sized chunk out of one wraith's carapace, causing it to emit a shrill, metallic screech. The creature flickered into visibility, a nightmarish, serpentine machine with a skeletal, eyeless head and three long talons for arms. It writhed, half its body still embedded in the wall, via its phase gear. The first wraith lunged down at me from the ceiling. I rolled aside as it lashed out with a bladed tail. The tip clanged off my left shoulder plate, carving a deep gouge but not penetrating the ceramite. I came up on one knee and fired point blank. Bolter shells blew through the wraith's torso, bursting out its back in a spray of glowing cabling and green fluid. The construct let out a static hiss and collapsed, half-phased into the floor, its upper half flopping on the surface, while its lower portion was stuck inside the metal, flickering as its phase module shorted. The second wraith on the right wall dropped behind Gabriel, aiming to impale him from behind. But Gabriel was already spinning, power sword shrieking as he ignited its blade. With a crackling blue arc, the Dark Angel slashed upward. The energy blade cleaved the wraith's front limbs clean off, sending them clattering to the floor. Gabriel followed through with a point-blank shot from his bolt pistol into its face. The creature's skull-like head exploded in a burst of sparks and vaporized metal, and it crumpled. The third wraith, the one Gabriel had shot first, finally extricated itself from the wall, now fully visible and sparking from the gaping hole in its midsection. It lunged at me with frightening speed, considering half its body was trailing shredded components. I sidestepped, swinging my combat knife in a wide arc to intercept. The mono-edged blade glanced off its chitinous hide as it partially phased to evade the blow, but I managed to deflect its trajectory. It wheeled on me, claws outstretched, poised to strike. A bolt round from Gabriel punched into its midsection, detonating and blowing out its spine. The wraith collapsed in a heap of twitching shards and wiry tendrils at my feet, sputtering no more. I exhaled, the hall now eerily quiet again. I scanned for any additional distortions. None. Clear, I said over the vox. Gabriel nodded, catching his breath. He held up his left forearm. The wraith's tail had scored a burning line across his bracer, though it hadn't pierced the armor. Clear, he confirmed. I glanced at the gouge on my own shoulder plate, where the first wraith struck me. Superficial, though the bastard had left a scar in the black paint. "Little rust snakes," I growled. "I hate those sneaky things." Gabriel managed a wry note. "Better to hate them when they're dead." He flicked gore off his power sword and deactivated it, returning to his bolter. I gave the partial remains of the wraith embedded in the floor a hard kick, snapping off what protruded. Just to be sure. Emperor willing, that's the worst of them, I muttered, though in truth I doubted it. The tomb had thrown only a few wraiths at us. Perhaps we caught them in transit, or the Cryptek was testing us. Either way, bigger challenges were no doubt ahead. Our victory was short-lived. The distant sounds we'd heard earlier were growing louder. They were definitely weapon discharges. A heavy Ka thump echoed through the corridors now, followed by a sizzling snap that made the hair on my neck rise. It sounded like plasma or something similarly energetic, and it was accompanied by the unmistakable crack, crack, crack of Gauss fire. "He's fighting," I snarled, urgency spurring me on. We broke into a run down the corridor. The downward slope steepened, and the hall ended abruptly at another door, this one already half open, stuck askew by some internal malfunction. Bright flashes stuttered through the gap along with the noise of combat. We slid through the gap, weapons raised, and found ourselves on a ledge overlooking a wide chamber below. Immediately, I spotted Brother Garan. The Iron Hand was partially kneeling behind a fallen column in the chamber's center, his plasma gun protruding as he sent searing bolts at multiple moving figures around him. Relief washed over me at seeing him alive, but it was tempered by the situation. The chamber looked like some kind of assembly hall, with multiple levels and balconies, one of which we now occupied about 4 meters up from the floor. Necron figures down below were exchanging fire with Garan, 3 tall, broad-shouldered silhouettes advancing relentlessly. Necron Immortals. They marched forward with the implacable steadiness of automata, heavy Gauss blasters in their arms, spewing emerald death. I saw Garan duck back behind the rubble as emerald lightning flayed past, pulverizing chunks of the pillar he sheltered behind. The bigger threat, however, skittered along the far wall, a monstrous construct like a gigantic insect clinging to the vertical surface. It looked like a scarab crossed with a battle tank, one of the tomb crawlers we'd heard about. A hulking Necron automaton bristling with weaponry. Even as I laid eyes on it, one of its turret-like appendages swiveled and unleashed a blast of roiling violet energy at Garen's position. Garan barely ducked in time as the wall behind him disintegrated into a glowing haze. The weapon made a strange vibrating hum, and everything it touched simply vanished into nothingness. Throne of Terror, was that a transdimensional disruptor? One hit from that and Garan would be atomized or banished to some pocket dimension. "We drop down! Flank them!" I barked to Gabriel. He needed no coaching. He'd already shouldered his bolter and drawn a bolt pistol and grenade in his hands. I likewise snatched a grenade from my belt, a crack grenade, best for armored targets like that crawler. We nodded once and then leapt over the railing together. In midair, I loosed a Fenrisian war cry, both to announce our presence to Garan, so he wouldn't shoot us by accident, and out of sheer battle fury. We hit the ground with heavy clangs of ceramite on metal behind the group of Immortals that were focused on Garan. Before they could register our arrival, Gabriel's grenade sailed past them and detonated at the feet of one. The explosion engulfed the Immortal's legs in a flash, blowing them off and toppling the Xeno like a tree. It hit the floor with a crash, still alive but crippled. I barreled into the second Immortal shoulder first, my 300-kilo armored mass slamming it like a battering ram. We went down in a heap, my momentum carrying us into a cluster of broken statuary. I rolled off and came up in a crouch as the Immortal attempted to right itself, servos whirring. "Brothers, good of you to join me." Garen's voice crackled over the vox, dry even in the heat of battle. "You know us, never late for a party," I quipped, firing a quick burst into the Immortal I'd knocked over. The Kraken rounds punched into its torso and exploded, sending fragments of metal ribcage and circuitry flying. The Necron gave a warbling groan and collapsed again, trying feebly to drag itself upright. We had caught the Immortals in a deadly crossfire now. Gabriel was already upon the one he had crippled, hacking it apart with precise strikes of his power sword. Its head and weapon arms lay severed on the floor within seconds, and its glowing eyes dimmed. The third Immortal, which had been further away, turned its attention to us now, realizing it was caught between 2 fires. It swung its Gauss blaster toward me and let loose a volley. I had to hurl myself behind a jutting slab of plinth as a hail of emerald bolts chewed into the ground where I just stood, sending shards of hot metal pattering off my armor. One of the Gauss rounds grazed my hip plate. An alarming heat flared as a chunk of ceramite vaporized and scorched the bodysuit beneath. My secondary heart tightened, injecting pain suppressants. It hurt, but nothing vital was hit. Garen took advantage of the distraction we provided. With a whoosh hiss, he discharged his plasma gun at the Immortal in maximal mode. A lance of superheated blue plasma struck the Necron square in the chest. The Immortal was there one moment, and the next its upper body was a molten ruin. When the blinding afterglow faded, only its legs remained, still standing for a second before they toppled, the rest simply gone, vaporized or splattered around as liquid metal. That left the tomb crawler. The huge construct had scuttled around to cling halfway up a side wall, perpendicular to the floor. It bristled with multiple mechanical limbs, 2 front claws and several weapon arms. One weapon was the accursed trans-dimensional beamer we'd seen. Another looked like a double-barreled Gauss cannon. Sensing our interference, it shifted its aim toward us. "Cover!" I shouted as I saw the twin Gauss barrels swing in our direction. Gabriel managed to get behind a fallen slab as the crawler opened fire. A barrage of emerald darts sprayed our way, each one a green comet of unmaking. I felt one slam against my left pauldron, a glancing hit that stripped away the chapter badge and a layer of ceramite underneath, leaving a smoldering scar on my armor. Others zipped past with an angry buzz crackle, chewing up the environment around us. The entire area became a storm of jade energy and exploding metal fragments. I snarled and threw my crack grenade. It was a long toss, but power armor gives one a good arm. The grenade sailed true and clanged onto the crawler's carapace, magnetizing there for an instant before detonating. A sharp explosion blew off one of the mechanical legs and blasted a blackened crater in the thing's side, but it wasn't enough to kill it. The crawler let out a shrill, clattering shriek from some vocalizer unit and skittered down from the wall to the floor with a heavy thud. Now missing a limb, it moved a bit more clumsily, but still menacing. Garen emerged from cover opposite me and fired another plasma blast. The superheated shot splashed against the crawler's frontal armor, leaving molten streaks but not penetrating. The crawler answered by spinning its disruptor gun toward him. A sphere of warping energy coalesced at the muzzle with an eerie whine. Not good. Garen's cover was scant. In his heavy armor, he wouldn't dodge that in time. Without a thought, I broke cover and sprinted forward. "Hey, scrap heap!" I bellowed, drawing its sensors to me. I emptied the remainder of my bolter's magazine at the crawler as I charged head-on. Bolt shells sparked and pinged off its thick hull. I doubt I did any real damage, but I certainly got its attention. The hulking automaton pivoted to face this new, closer nuisance. Me. The crawler fired the trans-dimensional beamer. A crackling orb of unreality hurtled toward me like a ball of violet lightning. Only my enhanced reflexes saved me. I jinked hard to the left as the orb grazed past my right side. A wave of nauseating cold washed over that side of my body, and for an instant my vision blurred. Alarms flared across my HUD. I spared a glance. My entire right forearm armor, from elbow to wrist, was just gone. The orb had taken a chunk of my power armor and a good bit of the flesh beneath, and simply erased it from existence. I bit down a howl of pain. Searing agony lanced up my arm, but my Laraman cells were already coagulating the exposed meat, and my armor automatically injected pain inhibitors. I could still move the arm. Miraculously, the disruptor hadn't taken the whole limb, just a strip of flesh and armor from outer forearm. It was a grisly sight, but I'd survive, if I survived the next few seconds. Fueled by adrenaline and righteous fury, I closed the remaining distance to the crawler. It tried to bring a serrated claw down on me, but I slid under the initial swipe, popping up right beside the bulk of its body. With my good left arm, I plunged my chainsword into a gap between 2 armor plates and revved it to maximum. The teeth howled as they chewed through cables and alien metal, sending up a plume of sparks and greenish hydraulic fluid. The crawler spasmed, emitting a keening feedback screech. One of its legs slammed into me, knocking me back a step, but I kept my grip on the chainsword hilt, twisting it viciously inside the machine's guts. Meanwhile, Gabriel had not been idle. With a roar of his own, he leapt onto the crawler's back, gripping its carapace with one hand and raising his power sword high in the other. The Dark Angel drove the blade down with all his might, right into the heart of the crawler's mass, where the glow of a power core was visible through cracked plating, courtesy of my crack grenade. There was a blinding flash as his energized sword pierced the core. A thunderous explosion erupted from within the crawler, spewing fragments of living metal and arcs of green electricity. Gabriel was hurled clear by the blast and crashed against the chamber wall with a grunt, and I was flung backward to the ground, landing flat on my back with a teeth-rattling clang. For a moment I was dazed, ears ringing and vision dancing with spots. Where the crawler had been was now a pile of flaming scrap and a smoking crater in the floor. I shook my head and sat up, the auto-senses compensating for my disorientation. Gabriel was already pushing himself to his feet, a bit unsteady but seemingly intact. His armor bore new scorch marks, and one of his shoulder guards was dented in. Garen limped into view from around the rubble, smoke scoring on his left side, but otherwise alive. I got to my feet and looked at the destruction around us. Then, despite everything, the pain in my arm, the raw burn on my hip, the stench of ozone and burning metal, I let out a hoarse chuckle that built into a short laugh. "Ha! That's how you scrap a Xeno tank," I wheezed, cradling my right forearm, which hung bloodied and armorless at my side. Gabriel trudged over, rolling his shoulder and favoring one leg slightly. He cast a concerned glance at my ravaged arm. My gauntlet and vambrace were just gone. Pale, blood-slick muscle and a bit of gleaming bone were visible in the gap between my elbow coupler and wrist. "Medicate," he ordered, already retrieving a canister from his belt. He sprayed the coagulant foam generously over the wound. It stung, but quickly numbed and sealed the worst of it, staunching the bleeding and preventing further contamination. "Thanks," I grunted. I rotated the arm gingerly. It was weak, but I could still flex my fingers. "Emperor's bones, that stings." "A glancing hit only," Gabriel noted, his tone almost chiding in its understatement. He was breathing hard. "A full strike and we'd be chasing your atoms through the warp." Garen approached, handing me my bolter, which I dropped during the melee. The weapon was dented and smoking, but looked functional. Deathwatch craftsmanship, tough as we are. He gave a single nod. "Appreciated your timely intervention," he said, voice crackling. That was about as close to "thank you" as an iron hand got. I nodded back. "Any time, brother. Next round's on you." I tried to grin, though inside I was just immensely relieved we'd all survived that ambush. I quickly slotted a fresh magazine into my bolter and did a head count of the enemy. 3 Immortals down. One was still twitching, but a quick bolt round to the head finished that. The crawler destroyed, a scattering of scarabs melted by Garen's plasma. There were a few crispy scarab husks near where he'd been. We'd come out of it surprisingly well, all things considered. My moment of triumph was cut short by an echoing, disembodied voice that suddenly crackled to life from hidden emitters all around the chamber. It spoke in resonant, low Gothic, each word reverberating with a metallic timbre, dripping with contempt and dark amusement. "Ah, the interlopers speak," the voice said. It was impossibly calm given the carnage we'd just wrought on its minions. "Crude, Monkish. Your defiance is entertaining." We snapped back into a defensive stance, forming a triangle with our backs together, scanning all angles of the large chamber. A chill ran through me at that voice. It had the hollow, harmonized quality of a Necron, but more personality than any rank and file. This had to be the Cryptek, addressing us through the tomb's communication system. "You must be the one in charge here," I called out, keeping my tone level and my bolter raised. "We're Deathwatch, and we've come a long way for your head, Xeno Witch." A metallic chuckle echoed from the walls, echoing as if from every direction. "Introductions, how quaint," the Cryptek purred. "Very well. I am Amhetra, artisan of this dynasty, keeper of its secrets. And you, invaders, you have trespassed upon sacred ground and destroyed my servants." She didn't sound particularly upset, more like an entomologist mildly annoyed someone had stepped on her specimens. It made my skin crawl. "Amhetra, is it?" Gabriel shouted, pivoting slowly as he tried to pinpoint the source. "In the name of the Emperor, we order you to surrender and face his judgment. Cease these attacks, or we will destroy you." Ever the righteous fury, that one. A hiss of static that might have been a laugh answered him. "Surrender? Oh, little ape, you truly do not comprehend your situation, do you? You trespass in the domain of a Necron Cryptek of the ancient Somneft dynasty. This world, this vault, is ours by right of millennia. Your kind are momentary mayflies dancing on a grave you cannot fathom." "Spare me the history lesson," I growled, though I kept my voice projecting confidence. We needed to keep her talking, perhaps glean information or at least buy a few moments to regroup. "We know full well what you are, a Necron demigod with delusions of grandeur, hiding under the sand until some idiots woke you up. Now you murder Imperial citizens and think we'll just let you be. Not while one of us still draws breath." Amhetra's voice sharpened. "Imperial citizens, parasites squatting on our domain. They deserved their fates, and so shall you, but I must admit you are not like the others I've dissected. Space Marines, yes? Genetically wrought killing machines of the false Emperor." She lingered on that as if tasting it. "I have observed your kind in the past, curious creations, and you three, unique specimens. Differing gene line augmentations, yet functioning as a single unit. Fascinating." The voice slithered around us. Gabriel's grip tightened on his sword hilt. I saw an involuntary twitch of his jaw at her blasphemies about the Emperor. Garen's servo arm flexed above us, betraying tension even in the stoic iron hand. "You want specimens?" I shouted. "Come closer. I'll give you a few pieces, scattered all over this tomb." Another cackle, harsher this time. Fiery. "That must be Fenris I hear in your voice," she mocked. "And you," her tone shifted as if addressing Gabriel, solemn and wrathful. "A son of the first, yes? I remember your kind from before the fall of your great lion." Gabriel stiffened at that reference to his Primarch. The Cryptek's focus moved to Garen. "And an iron hand, quite literally. Ah, the irony. Such strong flesh, yet you hide behind metal trinkets." Garen bristled, and I heard a low cyborg growl from his vocabulator. "Abomination," he grated out. For him, that was quite an insult. Amhetra chuckled. "Abomination? Child, my people were crafting wonders while yours still howled at the moons. You think me an abomination because I improved myself beyond crude flesh? Because I seek to understand and elevate? Typical primate thinking. But no matter. I will enjoy taking you apart piece by piece and learning what makes you special." "You can try," Gabriel snapped. In answer, a hissing sound came from the walls. Thin vents had opened around the periphery of the chamber. I caught a whiff of a cloying, sweet scent. "Gas," Gabriel snapped. He'd noticed it too. My helmet filters kicked in as I sealed off external intakes. Readouts showed unidentified particles flooding the air, likely toxic or worse. The chamber began to fill with a faint greenish vapor. "She's venting something. Keep suits sealed," I voxed. Whatever it was, our suits could filter for a time, but extended exposure could overwhelm even Astartes' physiology. The disembodied voice spoke through the haze. "Do you think gas will stop your kind? Perhaps not. Your physique is most resilient. All the better." All of a sudden, my vision wavered. The green glow of Necron glyphs dimmed, replaced by flickering torchlight. I blinked and found myself not in a tomb at all, but in the great hall of the Fang on Fenris, my chapter's fortress. Feasting tables lay shattered around me, flames dancing on the rafters. The air reeked of smoke and blood. Corpses of my battle brothers were strewn on the stone floor, eyes glassy in death, their throats torn out by claws. I recognized them, my packmates from years ago, long fallen in battle against the Tyranids. They shouldn't be here. This wasn't real. Yet I saw movement. One of the bodies, their leader, my mentor, twitched, then sat upright with an unnatural jerk, his dead eyes fixed on me accusingly. "Why did you let us die, Ivar?" His voice gurgled, blood bubbling from his lips. A spike of sheer guilt and horror stabbed through me. I took an involuntary step back. "No," I breathed. This isn't real." The corpse pack of my brethren began to rise, one by one, in broken, puppet-like motions. I felt a cold dread I hadn't experienced since I was an initiate, trapped in an ice cave with a Fenrisian worm closing in. For a heartbeat, I believed the illusion, believed I was truly back on Fenris in a nightmare of failed duty. But the rational part of my mind rebelled. I tasted the copper tang of the air and smelled not Fenrisian blood, but the static bite of Necron energies. I forced my eyes away from the specters and saw the edges of the hall flicker, the image warping. With a snarl, I voxed, "Psychic attack! Illusions!" Just like that, the vision shattered. The grand hall and corpses melted away, and I stood once more in the Necron antechamber, heart hammering. In my vox, I heard Gabriel chanting a battle psalm, likely purging a similar hallucination. Garen's distorted Binaric litany buzzed as he recalibrated his optic implants. The Cryptek had tried to break our spirits with phantasms dredged from our minds, but our faith and conditioning held. "Such spirited vermin," Amhetra's disembodied voice crackled, sounding more irritated now. I spat on the floor, not that she could see. "We can play that game too, witch," I growled. I toggled through my Vox channels and activated an anti-Vox burst, essentially blasting static on broad frequencies, hoping to annoy her auditory sensors or disrupt her signals. A petty gesture, but it made me feel less helpless under her unseen gaze. A sharp hiss of annoyance echoed. "So be it. If gas and nightmares won't cow you, I prefer a more hands-on approach for specimens of your caliber. Come then, hunters. Enter my sanctum. Let us see what that vaunted Emperor's gene forging has truly made of you." With that, the presence faded, though clearly she was daring us to confront her deeper inside. The gas vents snapped shut, the haze dissipating. She wanted us alive, clearly, or at least mostly intact. We had an invitation, albeit one likely to a trap. I looked to my kill team brothers. Gabriel's face was hidden by his helm, but his stance was resolute. Garen's servo arm twitched eagerly. He'd purged the hallucination and looked none the worse for it. Both nodded to me. "Right," I said. "We go in, but on our terms." We navigated through the chamber toward the now open large door on the far side, the one we'd seen from above. It appeared Amhetra had opened it remotely. Beyond lay another passage, bathed in a reddish glow this time, a change from the tomb's usual green, a sign of the Cryptek's lair, perhaps. We moved deliberately, weapons raised. This hall was lined with what looked like containment tanks and operating slabs, an unsettling mix of Necron machinery and grotesque organic debris. I paused at one slab, my stomach turning. A dismembered human arm was pinned under a stasis field, perfectly bisected to display muscle, bone, augmetic implants, like a specimen on an exam table. Other slabs held half-dissected servitors and flayed Mechanicus corpses, innards spread out and categorized by alien instruments. "Emperor, preserve us," Gabriel whispered, voicing collective horror. This was a laboratory of nightmares, Amhetra's workshop, no doubt, where she had been studying and experimenting on the people she'd captured. My blood boiled at the sight. The Mechanicus adepts we were too late to save had been meticulously butchered in the name of Xenos science. Only our mission's focus kept me from raging out and smashing everything in sight. Instead, I vowed silently, "We will end this abomination and avenge you." Garen was scanning data on a Necron console, his posture stiff with what I assumed was contained fury, or at least intense discomfort. Iron hands express such in odd ways. "These logs, she's cataloging human anatomy and cybernetics," he reported, disgust leaking into his usually flat tone. "Experimentation notes. Subject expired during integration test 7. Emperor." "She's trying to graft or study our tech?" Gabriel asked, appalled. "Who knows?" I said through clenched teeth. "Whatever it is, it ends now." We left that horror chamber behind, moving with renewed purpose. Another door slid open at our approach, and we entered a vast circular room, a central vault by the look of it. It was enormous, with a high-domed ceiling that glittered with constellations of inset green lights. The floor was inscribed with a huge glowing sigil that pulsed under our boots. At the center of the chamber was a raised dais on which a complex apparatus thrummed, a lattice of black metal arches holding aloft a large, pulsing emerald crystal. Cables snaked from the crystal into the floor like roots. The entire chamber was suffused with that eerie red light rather than green, giving it a hellish ambiance. And there she was. Atop the dais near the device, a tall, skeletal figure awaited us. She was draped in an ornate cloak of shifting metallic scales that reflected red and green in mesmerizing patterns. One bony hand gripped a staff crackling with coiled energies. The other hand held a small, cube-like artifact covered in glowing glyphs. No doubt the very item the Magos had recorded finding. Amhetra's face was a metal death's head, but more finely wrought than a mere warrior. Delicate filigree traced arabesques across her cheeks, and a tall, spined headdress flared from her temples. Her eyes blazed with cold emerald light as she regarded us entering her domain. If a Necron's visage could convey emotion, hers did, a mixture of curiosity and malice. Flanking the dais were two imposing Necron figures, unlike the Immortals we'd fought. These stood nearly as tall as a space marine in Terminator armor, each clad in heavy ornamented plating and bearing a massive gleaming war scythe, crackling with green energy along its blade. Lich Guard, elite Necron bodyguards. They stepped forward in unison as we spread out at the chamber's edge, forming a line. My heart thumped with battle fervor. This was it, the heart of the mission. "So you accept my invitation," Amhetra said, her voice now emanating from her actual form and echoing in the vaulted room. It sounded even more hauntingly hollow in person. She descended a few steps on the dais, gliding unnaturally rather than walking, some anti-grav motors on her cape, perhaps. I hoped you would. 3 specimens of Astartes, different origins, different enhancements, such an opportunity for discovery. She almost sounded hungry. "We're not here to further your twisted science," I spat. I started to circle cautiously to my left, forcing one of the Lich Guard to track me. Gabriel mirrored to the right, leaving Garen in the center. "We're here to send you back to whatever hell you crawled out of, Xeno." Amhetra tilted her head with a raspy clicking sound, as if amused. Bold words from such fragile creatures. She then actually sighed, a grating mechanical exhalation. "I had hoped to collect you alive, but you've proven far too troublesome. Reduced circumstances will suffice." With a screech of metal on stone, the two Lich Guard charged. They moved with alarming speed for their bulk, splitting to engage us. The first one closed on Gabriel with ground-eating strides. Gabriel met it head-on with a roar, their blades clashing in an eye-searing spray of sparks. Blue lightning from his power sword crashing against the Lich Guard's sickly green war scythe field. The sheer force of the impact forced Gabriel back a half step, boots squealing on the metal floor, but he twisted and deflected the scythe aside at the last second before it carved him in two. The second Lich Guard beelined toward Garen and me. We split apart to flank it, but it chose me as the nearer threat, swinging its war scythe in a wide horizontal arc. I ducked, feeling the hum of the disruption field as the blade sliced through the space my neck had occupied a split second prior. In retaliation, I slashed upward with my chain sword, scoring a line across its torso armor and eliciting a shower of sparks, but not cutting through. The Lich Guard retaliated with a backhand sweep of its scythe. I barely managed to parry with my chainsword. The force of the blow reverberated up my arms and nearly tore the hilt from my grasp. Emperor, these things were strong. Garen came at the Lich Guard's flank. His servo arm snapped forward like a piston, claw clamping onto the haft of the war scythe and arresting it mid-swing as the Necron tried to bring it down on my head. The iron hand snarled, as he wrestled with the towering construct. The Lich Guard let out a grinding snarl of its own and kicked Garen savagely with one heavy foot, its strength enough to send our 400-kilo brother skidding back a meter. But Garen's intervention gave me an opening. I darted in and, with both hands on my chainsword, drove it into the Lich Guard's chest where I'd scored it earlier. The adamantine teeth bit, and this time found purchase, grinding through the crack in its armor and into whatever passed for its vitals. The Lich Guard released a burst of some oily black smoke from its mouth grill and staggered. I ripped the chainsword out sideways, tearing a chunk of its torso with it. The Necron elite crumpled to one knee, still not out of the fight, but severely damaged. Garen recovered and, with a guttural shout, swung his power axe, he'd drawn it now, down in a glowing arc. The axe cleaved into the Lich Guard's neck, shearing halfway through. I followed up, brutally hacking with my chainsword at the opposite side of its neck. With a tortured crunch, the Necron's head came free, rolling across the floor. Its body collapsed, finally inert. Meanwhile, Gabriel was locked in a dazzling duel with the other Lich Guard. I risked a glance as Garen and I turned to assist. The Lich Guard pressed him relentlessly, war scythe slashing and stabbing in blurs of green. Gabriel was meeting each strike with his sword or dodging by hairs, but I saw his armor was scarred from several glancing hits. One pauldron hung in shattered pieces, and blood dripped down his side from a rent under his arm. Still, our Dark Angel fought magnificently. With a feint and riposte, he managed to slice off the Lich Guard's left arm at the elbow joint, sending the lower limb and the shield it carried clattering away. I realized it had a shield too, which now lay on the ground. The Necron bodyguard reeled back momentarily, adjusting its stance. We seized that moment. Garen leveled his plasma gun from a few paces away and fired. The plasma blast struck the Lich Guard square in the back, blowing a molten hole clean through its chest. At the same time, I raised my bolter and hammered a trio of Kraken rounds into its side. The overlapping impacts blew the Necron elite apart from multiple angles. Its remaining arm and head were torn off, and the torso toppled with a crash, glowing fluids spurting and then guttering out. A high-pitched shriek of electronic fury echoed from the dais. Amhetra did not charge at us directly like an enraged beast. No, that wasn't her style. Instead, she pointed her staff and a bolt of crackling emerald lightning arced out. Garen and I dove aside as it slammed into the spot we'd been standing. The floor erupted in a shower of sparks and flame. I felt a searing heat wash over my leg, though it missed me. We spread out to avoid giving her an easy target cluster. She floated down from the dais, moving with unnerving grace, and advanced on us. Her staff flared with green fire, and she hurled another bolt, this one at Gabriel, who was still catching his breath after felling the Lich Guard. He barely vaulted behind a pillar as the emerald streak obliterated a chunk of the floor and pillar where he'd been. I popped up from behind a shattered console and returned fire with my bolter, sending a disciplined burst her way. But with her other hand, Amhetra raised that cube artifact. Now I saw it acted as some kind of projector. A shimmering energy barrier snapped into being in front of her, absorbing the bolt rounds in a ripple of light. She laughed, a grating rasp. "Your primitive guns will not avail you," she taunted, voice booming in the chamber. To punctuate her point, she flung her other hand out, and a pencil-thin beam of sickly light lashed from a jewel on her staff straight at me. I juked, but it grazed my left thigh plate. Instantly, my armor there crumbled, just disintegrated into rust and dust, leaving the bodysuit exposed and a shallow burn seared along my outer thigh. Even through pain suppressants, I hissed. That beam was a disintegration ray. "Spread out," I voxed. "Don't let her line us up." Gabriel flanked to the right, I to the left. Garen held center behind cover, exchanging meaningful looks. We needed to overload or circumvent that shield of hers. As if reading our thoughts, Amhetra pressed the attack. She flew toward me, staff raised high. At the last second, she lunged downward, swinging the staff like a spear. A wicked curved blade at its end, glowing with a eerie green aura, slashed at my head. I parried with my chainsword, steel screeching on living metal. Her strength was considerable. Augmented by her augmentic limbs, she was as strong as a power-armored marine or more. The impact jarred me, but I held. Her skull face loomed inches from my visor as we locked weapons. "Your corpse will make an excellent cadaver for study," she rasped, putting more pressure down. My arms trembled as I held back her staff blade from carving into my collar. "Not today," I snarled, and in a most undignified move, I spat a glob of blood from a cut in my mouth right into her faceplate. She recoiled just a fraction in disgust or surprise. I seized the opening and swung my chainsword in a vicious horizontal slash aimed to carve her in two. But to my astonishment, the blade passed through empty air. Her form shimmered and momentarily became insubstantial, a ghostly silhouette, a phase shifter. She rematerialized a pace back, giving a grating laugh at my futile strike. In that instant, a bolt shell whizzed past my ear and struck Amhetra's now corporeal skull. Gabriel had crawled forward behind a heap of debris, retrieved his bolter, and fired a precise shot. The explosive round caught her just below one eye, blasting off a chunk of her face and the ornate headdress above it. Amhetra reeled, an otherworldly screech erupting from her damaged Vox grill. Her staff clattered from her hand as she instinctively raised her remaining hand to the torn half of her face. Green lumens flickered and went out in one eye socket, and her voice crackled with a burst of what might have been an enraged curse in Necron tongue. I wasn't about to waste the opportunity. Summoning all remaining strength, I lunged and drove my roaring chainsword straight into Amhetra's chest. The diamond-hard teeth chewed through her filigreed ribs and out the other side of her spine. Her lone, still bright eye flared in shock. "For the Emperor!" I snarled, twisting the blade. Metal screamed. Amhetra's spindly limbs flailed, and a wash of sparking greenish fluid gushed over my hands and armor. With a guttural yell, I ripped the chainsword out sideways, cleaving through internal components and nearly bisecting her from shoulder to hip. The Cryptek collapsed backward onto the floor, severed almost in half, her torso sparking and leaking luminous fluids. Her staff lay to the side, flickering fitfully, and the cube artifact rolled from her failing grasp. Amazingly, she was still conscious. Necron resilience. Her upper body dragged feebly, one clawed hand stretching toward that fallen cube as if it might save her. The eerie light in her one intact eye fluttered. "Impossible," her voice whispered, garbled and filled with some emotion I couldn't pin. Disbelief? Outrage? Fear? I aimed my bolt pistol, still mag-locked at my thigh miraculously. "Stay down, corpse." I emptied 2 shots into her head and the center of her chest for good measure. Her skull shattered under the bolts, and her chest cavity blew open, silencing that unnatural voice at last. The remains of Amhetra's body slumped, the green glow in its ruined eye and circuits fading to black. I staggered back a step, adrenaline still coursing, but my body near exhaustion. A win. The Cryptek lay in pieces at my feet. Throne, what a fight! With the enemy down, I turned urgently to check on my squad mates. Garen was alive, struggling up to one knee by a fallen column, but Brother Gabriel lay on his back a few paces away, amidst shattered Necron debris. My heart's clenched. I rushed to his side and dropped to a knee. Gabriel's breastplate was cracked open, a jagged shard of metal, maybe shrapnel from the crawler, or a fragment of a war scythe, embedded just below his ribcage. Blood seeped around the edges of the wound, and his breath came in ragged gasps. His once bright green eye lenses were dimming, flickering with each shallow inhale. He tried to speak as I leaned over him. A weak cough rattled out of his helm's vocalizer, spraying blood inside his mask. I gently removed his helmet to free his airway, revealing a pale face slick with sweat. His eyes, usually so steely, were unfocused and rimmed with pain. It's done," he wheezed. "Yes, brother, we got her. Hold on," I said, my voice rough as I tried to keep it steady. Gabriel managed the ghost of a smile, though crimson blood dribbled from the corner of his mouth. "Emperor, be praised," he whispered, barely audible. Garen limped over, his own leg actuator sparking and half supporting himself with his servo arm. One look at Gabriel's injury told the story. "We must extract him. Now," Garen said, already applying a coagulant from his belt to the wound. The Tech Marine's usually emotionless tone held a note of urgency. I nodded, swallowing hard. This was bad. Even with an apothecary's care, Gabriel's wounds were likely mortal. But I refused to lose him here, not if there was any chance. "Up you get, brother," I said, sliding my arms under Gabriel's and lifting him as gently as possible. He bit back a groan, pain surely lancing through him. Garen supported his lower body, careful not to jostle the metal shard protruding from his abdomen. Even in the chaos, Garen did not forget our mission. As we began to move, his servo arm snaked out to snatch up the strange Necron cube artifact that Amhetra had dropped, clamping it securely. Objective in hand, we turned toward a breach in the chamber wall that offered our only exit. Behind us, that giant crystal on the dais, the heart of the tomb's systems, finally exploded with a bone-rattling whoomp. A wave of green energy whooshed through the chamber, throwing up dust and flickering the red lights to black. The entire vault trembled, metal screeching. Without the Cryptek's control, the ancient Necron infrastructure was collapsing. "Go, go," I urged, half dragging, half carrying Gabriel as Garen hobbled alongside. We headed for the breach in the wall, the only apparent way out since the main entrance had caved in under falling debris. Already the floor beneath us vibrated and cracked as fail-safes misfired. Chunks of the ceiling came crashing down, smashing into the dais and pulverizing columns. A support strut groaned and fell across our original entryway. No going back that way. We plunged into the tunnel beyond the breach, an access conduit sloping upward. The light was minimal, just the glow of emergency runes swirling around us. I turned up my helmet lamps to max, sweeping them ahead. The tunnel shook and sand poured in through newly formed cracks. It was a grueling ascent. I had Gabriel's arm over my shoulders, effectively carrying his weight. He was barely semi-conscious, legs dragging. Garen limped beside us, his servo arm occasionally bracing the tunnel ceiling where it looked unstable, as if sheer force of will could hold it. My lungs burned and every muscle ached, but I pushed on. We did not speak. There was only the roar of the collapsing tomb behind and the pounding of our hearts. Finally, after a few hundred meters of upward scrambling, we saw daylight, a fissure opening to the surface up ahead, partially obscured by debris. The last stretch of tunnel had partially caved, forcing us to clamber over a mound of rubble. I went first, hauling Gabriel up over it, then Garen. We emerged into the open air just as the sun was starting to set. The sky was a deep bruise purple, streaked with crimson clouds. We found ourselves on the side of a sandy ravine a few hundred meters from where we'd entered. Behind us, the ground was collapsing into itself. An entire section of the ridge sank with a tremendous rumble, creating a cratered depression. A plume of dust and steam whooshed up, turning the twilight hazy. We half stumbled, half slid down the slope to a relatively flat stretch of ground, a safe distance from the sinking tomb entrance. Only then did I allow myself to collapse to my knees, carefully lowering Gabriel onto a slab of rock. Garen collapsed to one knee as well, his left leg actuators finally giving out with a shower of sparks. He tore a length of charred Mechanicus robe from a bit of wreckage clinging to his armor and began binding it around my bleeding thigh without a word, always efficient even now. I nodded thanks numbly. I removed my helmet, clipping it to my belt. The air was cold now that the sun was low, and the first stars were peeking out. I sucked in a deep breath of that dusty, rad-tinged air anyway. It tasted of ashes and victory. Brother Gabriel was in bad shape. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and rattling. I gently removed his helmet, which was already loose from me taking it off in the tomb. His face was ashen, lips flecked with blood. Even with Laraman's cells, the wound through his torso was mortal without immediate medici. We laid Gabriel's body gently on the stony ground. His blood had soaked his armor's seals, and his breaths were nearly non-existent. I took his hand in mine, feeling how cold it had grown. Suddenly, Gabriel's eyes fluttered open. By some final reserve of strength or sheer will, he looked at us one last time. "Brothers," he whispered. I squeezed his hand. "We're here. Hold fast, Gabriel. The transport is coming. Just hold on." He gave a minute shake of his head. "No, my fight is done," he breathed. A wet cough racked him and fresh blood bubbled on his lips. "Listen, Ivar." I leaned closer, my throat tight. "I'm listening." His dimming eyes bored into mine with an intensity that defied death. "Take my gene seed. Promise it reaches the rock. The rock. The fortress monastery of the Dark Angels. Even now, at the threshold of death, duty to his chapter burned within him. "I promise," I said, voice cracking despite myself, "your progenoids will be delivered safe, by my oath." Satisfied, Gabriel managed a faint, contented smile, the same slight smile I'd seen him allow himself after a hard-won victory. "It was an honor," he rasped, "to fight with you, brothers, to know there is trust between our chapters. Tell them I died well." A lump grew in my throat. Garen bowed his head silently. I fought back tears. We space wolves are never shy to weep for a fallen packmate, but there would be time later. "You will be honored, Brother Gabriel," I said softly. "Your name will be entered into the Watch's roll of heroes. The Emperor already knows of your valor." Gabriel exhaled a shuddering breath. "For the Emperor," he whispered, so low I barely caught it. His hand tightened weakly once, then went slack in my grip. His eyes fixed on the darkening sky above, as though seeing something far away. And then they saw nothing at all. Brother Gabriel, Dark Angel, Slayer of Xenos, was gone. I closed his eyes gently, then bowed my head. For a few long moments I just knelt there, holding my brother's lifeless hand, and the only sound was the distant sigh of the wind across the wastes. Eventually I broke the silence. Voice low and hoarse, I intoned the Deathwatch's oath of moment, commending Gabriel's soul to the Emperor. Garen joined in with the responses, his normally monotone voice carrying a hard edge of emotion. When the last words of the prayer faded, I carefully retrieved Gabriel's progenoid glands from his body, a grim task usually left to an apothecary, but in the Deathwatch every Marine is prepared to do it. One gland from the neck, one from the chest, both miraculously intact. I placed them in a stasis vial from Gabriel's own belt kit and secured it to my armor. His chapter would receive them as promised. Only then did I allow myself to truly acknowledge the weight on my hearts. Gabriel was dead. We had won. Somneft's Necron threat was neutralized, but one of my brothers lay still and cold. Bittersweet, that was the taste in my mouth. We'd won, but at great cost. Brother Gabriel was gone, his life given so that we might complete our mission. At least we had recovered his gene seed from his fallen body, ensuring his chapter's legacy would endure. Garen would require a new bionic leg interface after his injuries, and I'd be picking metal splinters out of my guts and regrowing the missing pieces of my arm for a while. But two of us were alive to remember him. In this unforgiving universe, that counted as a victory, albeit a hollow one. As the retrieval Thunderhawk streaked down through the atmosphere towards us, lights blinking in the dusk, I found myself utterly drained. Garen had set off our extraction beacon moments after we surfaced, and bless the machine god, our transport had heard it. I gently laid Gabriel's body in a better resting pose, folding his arms over his chest and draping the scrap of Mechanicus robe over his face. He almost looked peaceful. Garen stood silent vigil, holding the Necron cube artifact, our grim prize, across his chest like a ritual offering. We didn't have to wait long. With a roar of engines, the black silhouette of our Thunderhawk gunship descended, dust blasting in waves as it touched down on the flats nearby. Its forward hatch hissed open. I slung my arm under Gabriel's shoulders and, with Garen's help, lifted him for the last time. It felt wrong to leave him behind on this forsaken rock, and so we wouldn't. We'd carry him home to whatever honor awaited. In grim silence, we bore Brother Gabriel up the ramp and into the hold of the Thunderhawk. Servitor clamp arms on the gunship gently took his body from us and secured it for the journey. I staggered to a bench and collapsed onto it, suddenly feeling the full weight of every ache and wound. Garen sat opposite me, manually locking his failing leg in place and leaning back with a sigh of hydraulics. As the ramp sealed and I felt the thrum of takeoff shudder through the deck, I stared emptily at the blood smears on my gauntlets. Gabriel's blood. My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to scream in triumph and anger and sorrow all at once, but I held it in. Instead, I reached over and clasped Garen's forearm. He looked up, meeting my eyes. In that simple gesture, we shared the grief and the fierce satisfaction of duty fulfilled. We had done what we came to do. Somneft's Necron tomb lay in ruin. An entire region of the sector was safer for it, at least for now. Yet the cost was steep. It always is. The Thunderhawk banked and roared for the upper atmosphere, homeward bound to watch Fortress Prescience. As I sat there in the dim hold, the events of the day playing over in my mind, I thought of Gabriel's last words. Tell them I died well. Aye, brother, you died as only a true Astartes of the Deathwatch can, on your feet, facing the Xeno, buying victory with your blood. The gunship's engines howled, and through a small viewport I watched the surface of Somneft receding. The collapsed tomb a mere dark scar on the land now. The stars were coming out in force above, cold and uncaring. I took a moment to glance at the sealed vial at my belt, containing Gabriel's gene seed. We will see it home, I vowed silently. And I'll see that Amhetra's cube finds its way to the Ordo Xenos vaults, so someone wiser than me can decide what to do with it. We had won a battle this day, not a war. The wars never end, but a battle. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing over the corpse of a great beast with its fangs still embedded in your friend's throat, bitter and sweet all at once. I looked over at Garen. He was staring straight ahead, lost in whatever half-mechanical reverie iron hands have. One of his remaining organic eyes was swollen and blackened, likely a bruise from the Lich Guard's kick. I realized I probably looked no better, covered in blood, one arm half exposed and burned, limping and exhausted. Emperor, what a sight we'd be to the armsmen when we landed. I managed a tight smile. Another day in the Deathwatch, eh, brother? I said, voice wry and weary. Garen considered me for a moment, then unexpectedly let out a short, dry chuckle. Affirmative, he said simply. I leaned back and closed my eyes as the Thunderhawk broke into the starry void. In my mind's eye, I saw Gabriel giving me that stern look when I'd made a joke on the drop. I saw him fighting that Lich Guard, unwavering to the end. I saw us clinking glasses in the refectory after our first successful mission months ago, when he'd finally laughed at one of my off-color Fenrisian toasts. I felt a weight in my chest, but also a spark of pride. We had done our duty. We had made the Xenos pay dearly. In the grim darkness of the far future, that's the best we can ever hope for. My eyes snapped open, and I found my voice. Softly, I began reciting the Ballad of Fallen Heroes, a space wolf lament, low and growling, to honor Gabriel in my own way. Garen listened in silence, the only other sounds the thrum of the gunship's engines. Outside, beyond the hull, the stars witnessed our ascent. Another battle won, another brother lost, the Emperor's work done, at least for today. Every day is a good day to die, they say, but not today. Today was a good day to live, and to make the alien die instead. And that, as any Deathwatch warrior will tell you with a rueful grin, is as fine a day as one could ask for.